first, live, local. This is Fox 12 Now.
And hello, everyone. Welcome to Fox 12 Now. I'm Greg Nibbler, just taking a look there at that live shot of Portland. Actually, a little bit of sunshine coming through there. So, you got to appreciate that when it happens. And thank you all for joining us again. This is Fox 12 Now. We are live here every weekday starting at 1 p.m. Pacific and going throughout the afternoon. We cover a wide range of segments. We're live streaming on Facebook, YouTube, our website, and our apps. So lots of places to find us and join the conversations that we get to have. But right now, we're going to be talking about an update to Oregon's anti-stalking law. So this is a huge update from House Bill 4156, signed into law by Governor Kotek. And one of the co-sponsors of that bill joining us right now is Representative Kevin Mannix from Salem-Keizer in District 21. And Representative, thank you very much for being here. There's a lot I want to talk about with this new law and some of the things that it covers. But I think going back, you in 95, I believe it was, brought forth one of the first anti-stalking laws here in Oregon. And just to get a little bit of a context, I think, of the history and why this update is so big, could you tell us a bit about that original bill and what went into that?
Sure, and it's a pleasure to be with you. Back in 1995, in my earlier iteration as a member of the House of Representatives, I left in 2001 and I just came back in 2023. But back in 1995, we're talking about the era of fax lines, landlines. We did not have electronic communications the way we do today. And we did have a development that had occurred in our society where stalking was being carried on by individuals. And there were two kinds. One is the person who's simply obsessed with someone else, but the other kind is the predator who enjoys frightening someone else with stalking conduct. And we tried to cover all of this in 1995 with some fairly novel legislation at the national level. Nationally, a lot of states were making stalking itself a crime. And that's all well and good. It should be in most instances. But in some instances, we were dealing with a fellow who was just obsessed with another gal and went too far, needed to be told to stop and be told to stop in an effective way. So we passed a law, an anti-stalking law, that gave three approaches. One is the victim could seek a stop stalking order. Another is a prosecutor could simply seek a stop stalking order. And the third is you could also be accused of the crime of stalking. So we tried to envelop the issue. And if we're dealing with someone who was lovelorn and is going too far, a stop stalking order may have done the trick. In fact, it did. Those folks were just out of control. We set it up so that a judge could issue a stop stalking order. And in those instances of the lovelorn obsessed person, the stalking generally stopped. But in terms of the predator, the person who enjoyed frightening somebody else, we also made it a crime, and if you violated the stop stalking order, you could be prosecuted for that. If you engaged in stalking conduct and we hadn't even issued a stop stalking order, but you'd engaged in this conduct and you were caught, you could be prosecuted for the crime of stalking. And this was new at the time because we are very concerned about civil liberties, and we made sure that law enforcement had to follow the rules. And as law enforcement found they were following the rules, they also found that the way things might have been handled in the old days, I'll just say, off the record, and so to speak, in the sense that a few police officers pull a guy aside and say, look, leave this gal alone. Well, no, we want due process. We wanted a system where everyone's rights are protected, but we also wanted a system where the victim would be protected. So we passed the law. But what's happened since then is communications have changed. The interference in people's lives is sadly much easier in terms of creating identity falsification, interfering with someone's banking relationships, frightening someone's friends and relatives, tracking someone electronically. All of these new things that could be done had not been addressed in the original stalking law. So I developed in cooperation with stalking victims and law enforcement this legislation, which was signed by the governor last week, and I'm pleased to report that, so that we have expanded the anti-stalking law to include all kinds of electronic communications, all kinds of interference with a person's credit record, their banking records, their identity, giving false information to other people so as to frighten them about the victim. So we've broadened it so that we can get after these predators and put them under control.
When you talk about broadening it, and obviously, as you mentioned, things have changed so much over that amount of time, and even changes just sometimes month by month. Some of the different things that people are able to do when it comes to the ability to stalk someone electronically, virtually, all of those ways. So, just to give a little bit more context, when you talk about that expansion, can you give us some specifics as far as what that could concern? Something like using GPS,
Sure.
or if you don't mind.
Well, for instance, we didn't have really, unless you were a professional spy, uh, electronic tracking devices were not generally available. Today, they're readily available, and we've had reports made of stalkers placing electronic tracking devices on vehicles. Stalkers who can now interfere with the electronics of your vehicle so they could stop the engine from running through electronic devices. This is true interference. They can also engage in scams where they would insert untrue information into your records with finance companies, with banks. They could spread false images of you where they've superimposed the image on someone else's body, and this could include nudity, this sort of thing, creating false impressions, all of which are designed to frighten the victim and friends and family of the victim. The false information syndrome is frightening when you think about the things that can be done. So you can also track the person not only via a tracking device put on the car, you can also track them through their telephone. So all of the methods that are now available to track someone, to interfere with someone, and this goes beyond the traditional stalking where you're physically present. Some of these stalkers are unknown to the victims. And there was a time when we thought, well, everyone would know who the stalker is. Well, we don't know that necessarily until we catch them. And we want to be able to go back and say, you tracked this person, you interfered with their economic records, their bank records, their credit card records, you screwed up their lives. And it's a predatory conduct. So whatever you can imagine someone might do to scare someone else, to interfere with that person's life, identity theft, and I'll use that as an example. Identity theft was usually seen as an economic crime, and you'd commit identity theft in order to be able to recover some money, to steal some money, that sort of thing. Now, identity theft includes stealing someone's identity to mess up their personal records. And that was not included in the original identity theft law. So now he said, wait a minute, you're stealing someone's identity and creating a false bad identity. That's a form of stalking.
So it sounds like, this really is quite expansive when it comes to that. So just to clarify, when we're talking about things like cyber threats, we're talking about identity theft, you're talking about utilizing electronics or technology to track someone, or even going in and messing with someone's financial records. All of those could fall under this anti-stalking law.
Yes. And I'd like to remind everybody that you should contact law enforcement as soon as you're aware of stalking conduct. Law enforcement will know how to help. You can have recourse yourself still to a civil procedure where you hire an attorney and you go after someone civilly to get that stalking stopped. That's also possible. And under our stalking law, you can get a court to issue a stop stalking order pretty quickly. And that means that if they violate the stop stalking order, they're committing a crime of stalking. So there's several methods available, but people should be willing to contact law enforcement to ask for help. And law enforcement will now need to update their understanding of how this conduct is carried out. And I'm sure there will be training programs designed to help them understand what constitutes stalking and how to intervene to protect the victim.
Yeah, when it comes to that, say somebody is being stalked virtually, a lot of times they're not going to know may not know who that person is, which would make it a lot harder. But say they do know who it is, they have an idea of who it is. How would they go about reporting that and having that person potentially apprehended or be the recipient of an anti-stalking order?
They should gather up the information about the conduct that has occurred, about the identity of the stalker, and they should provide this to their local police department or sheriff's department as comprehensively as possible. And then the law enforcement folks can take action. And if you are in a position where you have access to a private attorney, you can also contact a private attorney to have a civil action brought. But the most important element, I think, is law enforcement's capability now to intervene, because before, a lot of these activities were not illegal. Oh, they might have been illegal for some other reason, but they weren't. In other words, identity theft is illegal. But under identity theft, you had to do it for economic purposes for yourself. Now we're saying, well, if you steal someone's identity to harm their reputation or to hurt them, it doesn't matter whether you were trying to make any money out of it. What matters is you're damaging somebody else. So as we implement this, it'll be important for us to see what else is going on out there and if there's any tweaks we need to make to it. But we have had this dramatic change to say electronic stalking is now subject to this law, and we're not going to put up with it.
Do you feel that police agencies in the state of Oregon are adequately funded or supplied or even knowledgeable enough to handle some of these specific issues that are going on?
In larger metropolitan areas, yes. In rural Oregon, no. And in fact, everywhere we have a shortage of law enforcement personnel. And that's another topic, of course, and I will support doing what we can to help law enforcement beef up their capacity. But law enforcement also understands how terrible this conduct is, and they will prioritize an intervention whenever they can. So it is important for law enforcement to know about the conduct. And yes, there is that limitation of resources, especially in rural Oregon. We're going to need to make sure that there's additional training provided to law enforcement. Some simple tools are made available, but they are used to the idea of getting stop stalking orders, going to circuit court, having a judge in a black robe tell someone to stop. That's when you could identify someone. Now we're going to have to help prosecutors deal with those who've been found out after the fact. How do we nail down their identity? But the other thing, and this is important, stalkers out there, listen to me now, beware. Because we are ready to take action against you. And if you have not been identified yet, but after the fact you are identified, we will go after you with a criminal prosecution because of the hurt and fear that you're imposing on your victim. And 90% plus of the time, the victims are women. Sadly, the vast majority of stalkers are predator men.
Absolutely. And that's statistically backed up as far as how that is. And something along these lines, though, when it comes to anti-stalking, I just want to ask for the sake, people before, when maybe they've sought an anti-stalking order against someone, a lot of times, maybe not every time, but unfortunately sometimes, people simply don't abide by it and they continue to do those behaviors, whether it's stalking someone, harassing someone, or whatever. So when it comes to that, if someone is doing that, what are the aspects of punitive measures that can be applied to these people who continue to violate those orders?
Well, you've raised a good question, because we also expanded the application of the stalking law in terms of protective orders which are entered. They are now enforceable throughout the state, not necessarily just in a given county where they may have been entered. So we broadened the enforceability. Beyond that, it's going to be up to law enforcement to make the case and to be willing to bring legal action. That's always going to be a challenge in terms of resources, but at least we've set up the structure where they can do this. We've also taken away some of the limitations on the application of these stalking protective orders. However, it's important to note that this is not the final perfect solution to the stalking problem. We're going to need to continue to do more. And as I hear from folks as to the implementation of this law, we'll be looking for refinements to help law enforcement. There is one irony here. The very electronic system that is used for stalking also provides us with documentation as to the stalking conduct, because we can track down that conduct and document. And that will be an important tool for law enforcement.
One final question here, and I don't know if this pertains to this law, which is why I'm asking. When it comes to social media and when we're talking about younger people and some of the stalking and harassment issues that happen there, is this something that would apply under that law, or is that something separate from this?
Now, if you're using social media to fool around with someone's identity, to falsely report things about the person, if it rises to the level of conduct which will cause fear in the victim, and the fear is one true for the victim, and it's objectively reasonable for the victim to be fearful, those are the standards as to stalking, then action can be taken.
Well, Representative Mannix, thank you very much for joining us to talk about this and to talk about these updates. Very important things for everybody to know about, and very important for the government, to stay abreast of all of these changes that happen when it comes to technology and the ways that people can unfortunately use it in poor manners like this. Anything else that you think people should know just about this bill in general?
I think what people should know is we're trying to protect innocent victims from predatory conduct. And if you have any hint of a desire to do something which is hurtful to someone else and will frighten them, don't do it. Because if we can, we're going to go after you and hold you accountable.
Well, Representative, thank you very much for joining us here on Fox 12 Now. Really appreciate your time.
My pleasure.
And for everybody who's watching, again, this is Fox 12 Now. I appreciate you joining us as well. So thank you for being here. We cover a wide range of topics on this show. If there's ever anything that you want to hear about, want to know more about, please send me an email, fox12now@kptv.com. We can do a little bit longer segments on here, and we can get people like Representative Mannix on to talk about important bills and measures that could affect all of us in different ways, in all kinds of different ways. So thank you for being here. If you want to watch this segment again or any of our others, I'm on all the platforms that you're watching me on right now, but of course, get the Fox 12 Oregon app. That's a great way to follow along with all of those. Thanks for joining us. I'm Greg Nibbler. This is Fox